and here. Okay. So we are starting today with Book 4, Discourse 14, on the story of King Vena. So this comes in the context of Vena's father, Raja Anga, had just abandoned the throne very suddenly because he was basically very depressed and unhappy, particularly because his son Vena was extremely adharmic and bullying people and abusing his authority and so on. And the father didn't handle it very well. Instead of trying to deal with the situation to try to mitigate harm, he just snuck away in the night and abandoned them. So Maitreya continued, the aforesaid sages, Bhrigu and others, solicitous as they were for the welfare of the people, saw that in the absence of a protector, men were being reduced to the level of beasts. Sending for Queen Sunita, the mother of Vena, of valiant Vidura, the sages, who were all expounders of the Vedas, crowned Vena as the sovereign of the globe, even though he was not approved of by the ministers, since they decided that it was urgent to fill the vacant throne immediately. Hearing that Vena, who ruled with an iron hand, had ascended the throne, thieves and dacoits, dacoits is a common Indian word for bandits, basically, soon hid themselves like rats afraid of a snake. Arrogant and self-conceited as he was by nature, Vena was now puffed up with pride, now that he had attained to the royal state and acquired the power and affluence of the 8 protectors of the world, and despised even holy men. The 8 protectors of the world are 8 gods, so it's kind of saying by way of expressing his ego that he felt that he had the power and affluence of the Lokapalas. Thus blinded with the intoxication of power and proud like an elephant not governed by a goad. I'm not sure if everyone knows what an elephant goad is. I'm sure that if you've ever been in India, you've seen them used. It's basically a long hook on a stick where elephants have a lot of kind of loose skin around the neck, especially, and you can just kind of hook it in there and pull. It's not very sharp. If you do it, some people are kind of abusive about it, but if you do it properly, it doesn't have to be painful to the elephant at all. But if you just tug on it, it's pretty easy to lead them. So, like an elephant not governed by a goad, he mounted a chariot and, touring all over and shaking heaven and earth, as it were, he banned all religious performances, proclaiming by beat of drum as follows: you shall never perform sacrifices, nor bestow gifts, nor pour oblations into the sacred fire under any circumstance, O members of the twice-born classes. Presumably because he wanted to kind of set up a monotheistic state religion where all veneration was just to him. Observing the conduct of Vena, who had taken to evil ways, and pondering the calamity of the people, the sages assembled at a sacrificial session, which was now illegal, and compassionately said, oh, a terrible calamity has befallen the people from both sides, from the thieves and the ruler, even as ants, etc., inhabiting a piece of wood lighted at both ends, in other words, lit on fire at both ends, find themselves in great peril. For fear of anarchy, this undeserving fellow was installed on the throne, but he himself is proving a source of terror. How can embodied beings live in safety now? Just as nourishing a snake with milk is fraught with danger to the very man who nourishes it, assuming it's like a poisonous snake and you're feeding it by hand. Vena, who was born of Sunita and wicked by his very nature, seeks to destroy the people themselves now that he has been appointed their ruler. Nevertheless, let us try to bring him round through persuasion, so that his sin may not touch us. For Vena, who was addicted to evil ways, was made king by us, even though we were aware of his sins. So when they're saying so that his sins may not touch us, they're saying what he does is our fault. We gave him this position of authority. If, however, the unrighteous fellow does not accept our advice, even when kindly addressed, we shall burn him with our spiritual fire, burnt as he already is by popular reproach. Thus resolved, the sages approached Vena, concealing their anger, and after soothing him with kind words, spoke to him. The sages said, Listen, O chief of kings, to that which we urge for your consideration, and which, dear child, is calculated to prolong your life and enhance your fortune, strength, and glory. Duty performed with mind, speech, body, and intellect bestows on men worlds which are free from sorrow, nay, even the eternal state on those who are free from attachment. The eternal state, of course, being moksha. Let not that duty, which consists in your case in ensuring happiness and security to the people, be abandoned by you, O valiant monarch. For when this duty is neglected, a Raja falls from his royal splendor. A monarch, O king, who protects the people against wicked ministers, thieves, and so on, and takes revenue from them as enjoined by the scriptures, enjoys happiness here as well as hereafter. The Lord, who is the protector of living beings and the soul of the universe, O noble king, is immensely pleased with the monarch who abides by his laws and in whose dominion and capital the very same Lord, who is also the deity presiding over sacrifices, is worshipped by the people through their duty, following their varna and ashrama. What remains unattainable when that Lord, who is the sovereign of the rulers of the worlds, what remains unattainable when that Lord, who is the sovereign of the rulers of the worlds, is pleased? It is to him that the worlds, along with their guardian deities, devoutly offer their tribute. It behoves you, O king, to win the affection of your nationals, who for your welfare worship through various sacrifices him who is the controller of the worlds as well as of the divinities, and even so of sacrificial performances, nay, who is the one subject of the three Vedas, who takes the form of material substances, and to whom all austere penance is directed. We've talked before about how sometimes the Vedas are counted as four and sometimes as three, leaving out the Atharva Veda, since the Atharva Veda is kind of separate in its purpose and its subject matter from the other three. Duly worshipped and thoroughly propitiated by means of sacrifices performed in your dominion by the Brahmanas, the gods, who are so many rays of Lord Srihari, shall confer on you the desired boon. It does not behoove you, O valiant monarch, to show disrespect to the gods, as he has done by banning the performance of yajnas. Vena said, "You are foolish indeed, mistaking as you do unrighteousness for righteousness. For ignoring the very Lord who maintains you, you wait upon a paramour. Oh, what a pity! The fools who disregard God in the form of a king can never attain happiness either in this world or in the next. Who is that Yajna Purusha for whom you cherish such devotion as corrupt women, to whom love for their husband is unknown, have for their paramour? Vishnu, Brahma, Lord Shiva, or I suspect he called him Kailasa Vasa, or some name meaning he who has his abode on Mount Kailasa. Indra, the Lord of Paradise, Vayu, Yama, Ravi, Parajanya, Kubera, Soma, Kshiti, Agni, Varuna, these as well as the other gods, who are capable of granting boons and pronouncing curses too, abide on the person of a monarch, for a sovereign represents all the gods. Therefore, free from jealousy, worship me, O Brahmanas, through religious performances and bear offerings to me, for what person other than me deserves your worship?" Maitreya went on. Even when thus supplicated, that highly wicked soul, whose reason had got perverted and who had strayed from the path of virtue, did not accede to their prayer, all good luck having left him. Slighted thus by that conceited fool, those Brahmanas got angry with him, O blessed Vidura, at their prayer being turned down. Let him be slain, they're kind of thinking or saying to each other. Let this wicked fellow, pitiless by nature, be killed. If he survives, he will surely reduce the world to ashes in no time. This immoral man does not deserve the exalted throne of a monarch, he who shamelessly reviles Lord Vishnu, the supreme lord of sacrifices. Who else than this unlucky Vena, the only one of his kind, would denounce him by winning whose grace the fellow attained such affluence and power? Thus resolved to get rid of him, the sages, who now gave free vent to their fury, dispatched by their very menacing sounds of whom? Vena, who had already been killed by reproaching the immortal Lord Vishnu. So that takes a bit of explanation there. Had already been killed by reproaching the immortal Lord Vishnu means had already basically set his fate in stone. dispatched him by their very menacing sounds of hum. They killed him with mantra shastra, by using an astra mantra, a weapon mantra. The humkara, the bija mantra hum, is one of the seed syllables of fire. And in a lot of the astra mantras, the mantras that are invoked in warfare, this is a really common one, among others. And so these are powerful sages with great, they're all great tapasvins. They all have great spiritual fire kindled within themselves, and they can channel it through the humkara bija to like burn a man to death in front of them, especially when a bunch of them all do it at once on the same target. So just by pronouncing this bija mantra, they burned him to death. The sages having left, each for his own hermitage, the sorrowing Sunita, Vena's mother, preserved the body of her son by means of spells and other devices. So she herself is a practitioner of magic of some kind, enough that she can use magic to take his burnt corpse and stop it from decaying, or at least significantly delay its decay. Having on one occasion bathed in the waters of the river Sarasvati and offered oblations into the sacrificial fires, and squatting on the riverbank, those sages held discourses about the Lord. They saw at that time evil portents appearing which caused terror to the world, and said, "No evil may befall the earth on accounts of thieves and dacoits, masterless as she is," since the throne is now vacant again. And the last time that happened, a bunch of bandits were trying to rise up and kind of set themselves up as local warlords or rulers. And so they are trying to figure out how to stop that from happening again. While the sages were thus reflecting, a large volume of dust was raised by thieves running in every direction and practicing spoliation wherever they went. So there's a breakdown of law and order going on. They then perceived the mischief wrought by those that looted the property of the people and were disposed to kill one another now that Vena was dead. They also came to know that the state had grown weak due to anarchy, and that thieves and dacoits had gained in strength. Though powerful enough, the sages did not stop the people, inasmuch as they were alive to the evil. That's a bit of a opaquely translated sentence, meaning that they didn't want to engage themselves in violence and step into kshatriya dharma, essentially. Instead, they considered, if a Brahmana who looks upon all with the same eye and is tranquil ignores the afflicted, the spiritual energy stored even by him will run out like water from a broken jar. The line of the royal sage Anga, too, must not get extinct. So Anga was Vena's father. Vena was Anga's only child, and Vena is now dead. But they're saying, for in this race have appeared monarchs solely depending on Lord Keshava and possessed of unfailing prowess. Having thus resolved, the sages churned with great velocity the thigh of the deceased emperor, wherefrom arose a dwarfish man, dark as a crow, with exceptionally short limbs and particularly short arms and legs. It's kind of the same thing as exceptionally short limbs. Large jaws, a flat nose, bloodshot eyes, and red hair. So through the performance of mantras and ritual processes that they knew, they managed to create a child from the corpse of Vena without a mother. He's somewhat deformed and strange, but he does live. To him, who was bent low and meek too, and who said, "What shall I do?" the Brahmana said, "Sit down." That is why, dear child, he came to be known by the name of Nishada. That makes sense in Sanskrit because Nishada essentially means one who sits down. Since he took upon himself the terrible sins of Vena, even while being born, his progeny, the Naishadas, partook of his nature and took up their abode on mountains and in woods. Thus ends the 14th discourse entitled The Appearance of Nishada, forming part of the narrative of Prithu in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And so we're now heading into the narrative of Prithu, who is an avatar of Vishnu, a major avatar of Vishnu, actually, although he's not one of the Dashavatara. Discourse 15 on the descent and coronation of King Prithu. Maitreya continued. Then again the sages treated with rubbing the arms of that lifeless king who had no issue. So again, performing their ritual process of being able to animate children out of the corpse of Vena. And out of the electrifying friction, there sprang a couple, a male and female. These far-seeing sages, who were enlightened with Vedic knowledge and were masters of divine doctrines, beheld the couple born and comprehended that the two were part manifestations, Anshāvataras, of the Supreme Person divine, who is omnipotent and omniscient and possesses all prosperity and glory. They became exceedingly happy to see the conjugate persons, and said, this male person is a part manifestation of that aspect of the all-pervading, all-knowing, and all-powerful Lord divine which protects the world. And this female person is a ray of the goddess of beauty, bliss, and prosperity, and hence never gets disunited from the Supreme Person. These, of course, being Vishnu and Lakshmi, avatars of Vishnu and Lakshmi. Of this couple, the male person will be the first of kings on earth, a mighty, not first sequentially, but first in glory and virtue. A mighty king to glorify the name and fame of every king in future, whose name will be Prithu, as the splendor of his name will shine far and wide. This other is a shining queen. Her name is Archi, an embodied process of radiation. Her finely set teeth are an indication of her firmly formed, faithful character. Her ornaments are emblems of her golden and gem-like virtues. Her feelings and thoughts are all ennobling, as hers is an ascending spirit. It seems as if she would outshine her husband. Thus, an inalienable power and part of the Supreme Lord Divine called itself into being in space and time on earth to save the inhabitants, the human beings, from sins and sufferings. This other, the queen devoted to him, the goddess of inexhaustible wealth and prosperity, also came into the world, as inseparable from him. Maitreya went on. The Brahmanas extolled Prithu, while the deities known as Gandharvas were singing songs, the chief of them, the chief of Gandharvas. The Siddhas were releasing showers of flowers. The heavenly damsels, the Apsaras, were dancing. The sounds of conches, trumpets, timbrels, and drums spread vibrating in heaven, as all celestial sages and orders of the divine fathers came down to the place. Brahma, the adorable lord of the world himself, came at the head of the greatest of the gods, noticed some sign of the divine wielder of the mighty mace in the right hand of Prithu. So some subtle mark on his palm of the mace Kaumodaki of Vishnu. And lotus marks on the soles of his feet, and thus recognized him to be a part personality of Sri Hari. He also noticed that Prithu bore on his palm the sacred sign of a disc unbroken by an alien line, indicating an unconquerable sphere of power, and knew him to be a ray of the Lord of Lords. The Brahmana priests, who had their religious culture founded on the rites and ceremonies dealt with in the Vedas, undertook to perform the holy ceremony of Prithu's installation, his coronation ceremony as king. People brought from all sides things necessary for the coronation. So among those who came with presents and offerings were the deities presiding over rivers, seas, and mountains, the sky and the earth, as well as serpents, birds, stags, and cows. When he was bathed with holy waters for the installation as a king of kings, arrayed in royal raiments and richly adorned with bright ornaments, and stood with Archi, his queen consort, equally adorned, he shone like a rival of fire itself. The god of wealth, O valiant Vidura, the Kubera, gave him a splendid throne of gold as a present. Varuna, the lord of the seas, brought to him an umbrella dripping with water and radiating beams like the moon. The god of the winds, Vayudeva, gave him 2 fans made of the tuft of hair of the tails of wild cows. That's a more symbolic gift than it may seem, since the 2 fans are one of the main symbols of Rajahood in this culture. The god of virtue, Dharmaraja, came with the present of a garland of flowers, the very embodiment of celebrity. Indra came to present him with an excellent crown, and the god of mortality and moral control honored him with a scepter by which to control all. Brahma, the lord of creation, brought for him an armor representing the Veda, and the goddess of learning, Saraswati, gave him a necklace of unique make. Sri Hari gave him his divine disc bearing the name of Sudarshana, and his consort, the goddess of wealth, beauty, and bliss, Lakshmi Devi, favored him with never-failing prosperity. The great god whose function is to destroy and absorb the world at the end, Rudra, of course, honored him with a broadsword bearing 10 brilliant marks of the moon, and his consort Durga with a shield bearing 100 marks of the moon. The moon, these are like little crescent moon marks. The moon, the deity presiding over the lunar sphere, Somadeva, brought him immortal horses made of the substance of nectar. An exceedingly beautiful chariot was given him by Tvashta, a radiant agent of the sun god, also kind of the smith god or forger god. The god of fire, Agni Deva, gave him a bow made of the horns of the goat and the cow, and the sun god. Oh yeah, that's fine, Dr. N. If you get cut off, I understand it's your reception where you are. The sun god Surya gave to Prithu arrows shining like his rays. The goddess of the earth brought for him a pair of wooden sandals possessing the mysterious power of carrying him, as soon as he placed his feet upon them, wherever he should want to go. The goddess of the celestial regions gave him the privilege of getting celestial flowers every day. The sky-ranging spirits imparted to him the arts of acting and dancing, music, vocal and instrumental, and the occult way of disappearance. The sages and seers brought for him blessings that were sure to come true, and the deity of the ocean brought for him a conch that was his own progeny. Seas, mountains, and rivers offered to allow passages for his chariot, such that the sea or the mountain or the river would part and let him just ride his chariot straight through on a flat, dry course of land, and close again behind him. Then a herald, a bard, and a panegyrist, these are 3 different types of kind of royal court musicians, started singing songs of praise to the mighty monarch. When Prithu, the powerful king, the offspring of Vena, came to know that they had come to praise him, he smiled and made these utterances with a voice as deep as the thunder of clouds. Prithu said, "O you noble minstrel, herald and singer of praises, praises may be due to me when my virtues will be known among men." In other words, he's saying, I haven't done anything yet. Like, praise me if I do a good job. Where is the ground at present for praises being addressed to me? It is not desirable that your eulogies should prove untrue in my case. Therefore, at some future date, when we attain distinctions worthy of being heard and spoken of, you who are masters of fine expressions may praise us to your heart's fill. Respectable persons do not let minstrels extol ordinary men like me of the recent times, it being open to them to glorify the greatness of God, whose shining attributes no darkness can touch. Who would have himself extolled by bards for qualities which are not existent in him, even though he may be able to manifest remarkable virtues in himself? Such and such qualities, it may be urged, are likely to fall to his lot, but to get oneself praised thus on mere possibilities is to be an object of people's ridicule. A fool, however, will not understand this banter. Noble-minded persons shrink from their own praise, even when they are praised for qualities confirmed by conduct and known to all, just as those who are truly modest and supremely generous do not appreciate sincere praise for any reproachful show of valor. As for ourselves, O bard, he's kind of using the royal we here, we are yet unknown in the world, hence we find no reason to get ourselves celebrated by songs of praise for greatest performances. Such self-proclamation is only worthy of a child. And thus ends the 15th discourse, forming part of the narrative of King Prithu in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 16, despite what he just said, the further glorification of King Prithu by the bards. Maitreya continued, the minstrels were delighted at heart to hear these sweet words of the king, which they enjoyed as ambrosia. Urged by the sages, however, They began to glorify him as soon as he ceased to speak. We are not able to describe your greatness, as you are the foremost among the gods and have come to the world through exercise of a mysterious power of yours known as Maya. You have arisen from the arms of King Vena, yet your powers and performances are such that the minds of even masters of speech get perplexed in trying to describe them. You are a part manifestation of the supreme divinity known as Sri Hari, which name has here been changed to Pruttu, the accounts of whose glorious deeds are worth hearing. We love to enjoy the same, as they are as good as nectar, and we want to spread the fame of your magnificent deeds as we realize them in our hearts according to the instructions of the sages. He is the best among those who pursue the paths of righteousness and will persuade the people to tread those paths. So they're now not talking to him directly, so they're saying he is. They're kind of singing to the crowd. He is the preserver of the various systems of moral and religious life, the ruler who punishes the antagonists that seek to violate them. Though one, he bears in his own person the bodies of the guardians of the celestial and terrestrial spheres, executing the different functions of beneficence, of protection, promotion of peace and happiness, and furtherance of the general well-being of both heaven and earth according to the need from time to time. He replenishes his royal treasury by collection of revenue when there is time for it, and again expends it by free distribution at times of emergency, in the same way as the sun, shining brighter, absorbs water and storing it as vapor for a large part of the year, releases it. This is, of course, referring to the cycle of seasons, where as during the hot season, the land dries up because heated by the sun, and then in the monsoon season, it rains again. They're using this as a metaphor for taxation. He is equally good to all living beings and as powerful as the sun. He is also like the earth. The earth is trampled upon by all beings, yet she kindly bestows her benefits on them when they are in distress. She is always compassionate. In the same way, King Prithu, the son of Vena, is ever gracious and beneficent to his subjects, in spite of the offenses and wrongs done to him by them, which he forgives. When the god of clouds will not allow them to rain, so that manifold sufferings will be caused to living beings, especially human beings, the king will come forward, and to save all kinds of life, order the clouds to rain, asserting his divine power as Indra, as he is God in the form of a human king. He delights the world by his shining face, which is an embodiment of ambrosial sweetness, by his bright glances, full of affection, and by his lucid smiles, beaming and beautiful. His ways are inscrutable. His deeds are too deep for thought. The purposes his mind pursues are too remote for comprehension. His wealth is well protected. The points of his magnanimity are innumerable. All qualities and attributes concentrate in him. Prithu is like the divinity of the ocean, completely self-contained. He is beyond the reach not only of his enemy's arms, but also of his enemy's thought. He is overwhelming in his power exercised against his antagonists. He is as if at a great distance when he seems to be near. He is invincible in every way. He is an incandescent force risen from friction from the body of Vena as fire from wood. Seeing the inner as well as the outer efforts and actions of men and other beings through spies, he continues to be unaffected, as an indifferent super-seer, as if he were the inner vital spirit that is there in every living body. He never punishes him who does not deserve to be punished, even if he be the son of those who are determined to do harm to his own self. On the other hand, he punishes his own son when found guilty, as he is established in the path of truth and justice. The sphere of the irresistible sway of Prithu is the limit of the advance of his army, and the path of the wheels of his chariot will extend from the Manasotara mountain to the whole region over which the sun shines with his rays. He will delight the various sections of his subjects by his own efforts and works, giving full satisfaction as well as fascination to their hearts. So he will be called a Raja. He is immovable in his promise and purpose. He never deviates from truth. He loves the Vedas and those who are devoted to the Vedas, the Brahmanas. He serves those who are advanced in age. He is ever ready to give shelter to all beings. He knows how to honor others. He is affectionate and compassionate to the poor. He regards and reveres the wives of others as his own mother, and loves his own wife as a half of his own body. He is loving as a father to those over whom he rules. He looks upon himself as a servant to those who are well versed in the Vedic lore. He is supremely dear to all as if he were no other than their own self. He is a constant source of increasing delight and joy to his friends and relations. He particularly seeks the company of persons who are free from all ties of attachment. He is ever up with arms of punishment against those who are evil-minded. He is the person supreme, directly manifested to men, the Lord of the three worlds. He is divinity absolute. He is the spirit pure that there is as the self-controlled soul in every living individual. In the exercise of one of his divine functions, he has appeared as a superman among men. When he is fully realized in his truth, the apparent multiplicity of the world due to ignorance will all disappear in him as phantoms in reality. He is the protector of the terrestrial sphere from the quarter of sunrise to that of sunset, a unique warrior and king of kings that he is. Seated in his triumphant chariot, armed with a bow, he will travel over the world as the sun travels along the circle of the zodiac in his celestial journey from the south to the north. Wherever he will be in course of his travels, the kings will come to acknowledge his supremacy with tributes and offerings, and it is believed that the guardians of the regions will follow the kings. Their consorts will think this primordial monarch to be no other than Lord Vishnu, who holds a discus in one of his hands, and will sing songs for his fame. And in theory, yes, they will in fact be right about that he is no other than Lord Vishnu. In obedience to him as a supreme, will sing songs of his fame. In obedience to him as a supreme king, earth will become a cow for him. This references a coming story. As a powerful patriarch, he will provide for the livelihood of the people. He will smash the mountains even as Indra did with the points of his bow and level the earth in mere sport. This also refers to something Prithu did, which was he introduced the practice of leveling land for agriculture. When he roams over the earth like a lion with his tail thrown up, twanging his bow made of the horns of a cow and a goat, and irresistible in encounter, all workers of iniquity will hide themselves here and there. He will perform as many as 100 horse sacrifices, 100 Ashvamedha yajnas, at the source of the Sarasvati river in Brahmavarta. And in the course of the last sacrifice, Indra, himself a performer of 100 sacrifices, will steal away the horse to stop somebody from matching his feet, since that's how Indra became Indra, and he doesn't want to lose his spot. In the garden attached to his own palace, he will meet the divine Sanat Kumara alone. Prithu will worship him with devotion and service and attain that pure and perfect enlightenment by which they realize the supreme absolute. Prithu's warlike power and influence are unlimited and are known far and wide. A large volume of sayings, songs, and sagas and stories will grow around him, and he will hear them wherever he will go. The vast orbit of his power knows no force of opposition. His burning spirit will enable him to destroy the enemies of the people by conquering the quarters. He will be a master of the earth, and his mighty glory will serve as the theme of songs for the chiefs of the gods and demons to sing. Thus ends the 16th discourse in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 17, King Prithu gets angry with earth, and the latter extols him. Maitreya continued. Thus glorified by recounting his virtues and exploits, the celebrated Lord Prithu gratified the panegyrists by honoring them with presents of their choice and applauding them. He greeted with due honor all the Varnas from the Brahmana downwards, meaning in order to give greetings to the Brahmanas, to the Kshatriyas, to the Vaishyas, and to the Shudras, and to his servants, ministers, and family priests, the citizens in general, as well as the inhabitants of his entire state, people following the various trades, and the functionaries and officials. Vidura said, so Vidura is the one who's hearing this story, so at this point he adds in a question. It says, wherefore did Earth, who could take any number of forms, assume the form of a cow that Prithu milked? Who played the role of a calf for the time being? And what served as the milk pail? Uneven by nature, how was the earth made even by him? And with what motive did the god Indra steal away his sacrificial horse? Having acquired spiritual knowledge and wisdom from the worshipful sage Sanat Kumara, the foremost of those who have realized Brahman, the absolute Brahman, O holy Brahmana, what was the destiny he attained to? meaning after he dropped his body. I am your loving devotee, as well as of Lord Sri Krishna, who is above sense perception. Therefore be pleased to recount to me all the other glorious and holy deeds of the Almighty Lord Sri Krishna of bright renown, connected with the story of that former manifestation of his. For I know it was no other than Sri Krishna who milked this earth in the form of Prithu, son of Vena. Sutta continued. So we're zooming out a narrator further. This is Sutta narrating to Shaunaka the story of Maitreya narrating to Vidura the story which we are hearing. So Sutta continued, urged in this way by Vidura to repeat the narrative of Lord Vasudeva, the sage Maitreya applauded him and with a glad heart replied to him. Maitreya said, when Prithu, dear Vidura, was crowned and appointed by the Brahmanas as the ruler of the people, his subjects, whose body had been emaciated through starvation, the soil being left without any food grains, approached so there was a famine at the time when Prithu was coronated. They approached their lord and said, oppressed with the gastric fire, even as trees with the fire burning in their hollows, O king, we have resorted today for protection to you, who are fit to protect us and have been made available to us as our lord, capable of providing us with means of living. You are the protector of the world as well as the bestower of livelihood. Do you endeavor, therefore, to give us food, afflicted as we are with hunger, O King of Kings, before we perish for want of provisions. Maitreya went on. On hearing the piteous lament of the people, O chief of the Kurus, Prithu pondered long and was able to perceive the cause. Having arrived, the cause being that Earth herself was withholding food. Having arrived at the above conclusion by force of reason, he took up his bow and in great indignation fitted an arrow to it, aiming it at Earth, even as Lord Shiva, the Tripurantaka, the destroyer of Tripura, aimed his shaft. This refers to, so Shiva destroyed Tripura, which were 3 cities in the sky, by waiting until they lined up in their revolutions and aiming one arrow through them. So it's kind of invoking that image, but he's aiming his arrow down at the earth. Seeing him with an uplifted weapon, Earth began to tremble, and manifesting before him in the form of a cow, ran in terror like a doe chased by a hunter. His eyes turned crimson with wrath. The son of Vena thereupon followed her, with the arrow fitted to his bow, whithersoever she ran. Running towards the various quarters and intermediate quarters, as well as towards heaven and earth and the region lying between the two. So this cow is flying in the clouds also. The goddess saw him with an uplifted bow wherever she went. She obtained no asylum against the son of Vena, even as created beings find no immunity from death. Then with a sore heart she returned, terrified, and said to the noble king, O knower of Dharma, kind to the afflicted, protect me as well, intent as you are on the maintenance of living beings. Such as you are, wherefore do you seek to kill me, a meek and innocent creature? How would he who is acknowledged as a knower of Dharma take the life of a female? People do not strike the fair sex, even though they have committed an offense. Much less would men like you, who are so gracious and fond of the miserable, stoop to such a thing. Having destroyed me, an undecaying boat on which the whole universe rests, how would you be able to support yourself, as well as all these created beings, on the surface of water? Prithu replied, Earth, I shall slay you, who have turned a deaf ear to my commands and take your share in the sacrificial offerings, but refuse to yield us crops. Punishment is not inadvisable in the case of the cow, which is so wicked that it feeds on fodder every day, but does not yield the milk of its udders. Foolishly disregarding me, you refuse to release the food grains already created by Brahma the self-born, and which you have concealed within your bosom. When your bowels are ripped open by my arrows, I shall be able to stop the lamentations of these afflicted ones seized with hunger, by feeding them your fat. For the rulers of men, to kill the vile and self-conceited soul, be it man, woman, or a sexless person. Sexless person here is a kind of clumsy translation. What it's saying is be they of Nara Prakriti, Nari Prakriti, or Tritya Prakriti. Who is merciless to beings is no killing at all. Having, in other words, that the morality of killing people has nothing to do with their gender. Having torn you with arrows into pieces as minute as sesamum seeds, you who are stubborn and arrogant and have assumed the illusory appearance of a cow, I shall support these created beings by sheer dint of my yogic power. Seized with a tremor, because he has successfully intimidated her, and bowing low, Earth spoke with joined palms to the king. Presumably she's no longer fully a cow if she has palms. Who, like death, bore a form which was the very embodiment of wrath. Earth said, Hail, hail to the transcendent person who evolves diverse forms by dint of his Maya and appears as constituted of the three gunas, though he has, by realizing his essential nature, eliminated all identification with physical matter, the jiva, or embodied spirit, and the controller of both. This is, I eliminated all identification with adhibhuta, adhideva, and adhiyagnya, and is above all modifications. The same supreme maker by whom I have been created to be the abode of living beings and from whom has proceeded this creation consisting of the three gunas, is ready with uplifted weapon to strike me. Whom else shall I resort to for protection? He who evolved at the dawn this world consisting of animate and inanimate beings by dint of his Maya, which rests on himself and is beyond all speculative reasoning, is now out to protect it by the same Maya. How should he seek to kill me, devoted as he is to righteousness? The Lord Almighty, though one, appears as many by virtue of his Maya. It is he who evolved Brahma the Creator and caused the universe to be brought about by him. Surely the doings of such a Lord cannot be understood by men whose mind is tossed by his Maya, which is so hard to conquer. Hail to the Supreme Person, the Maker, who brings into play and then withdraws into himself his potencies, and who brings about the creation, preservation, and dissolution of this universe by means of his potencies in the shape of the five gross elements, the 10 indriyas, and the deities presiding over them, the faculty of understanding and egotism. It is you, O birthless Lord, who, in order to place on a sound footing the creation brought forth by you and consisting of the five gross elements, the indriyas, and the inner sense, lifted me up from the depths of the ocean and took me out of water, assuming the form of the primeval boar. Appearing in the form of a hero, you who once played the role of lifting up the earth now seek to kill me with your fierce arrows for the sake of milk, keen as you are to protect created beings who have taken up their abode in me, as in a boat on the surface of water. Surely the doings of divine personages cannot be known by people of my ilk, whose mental horizon is clouded by your Maya, which brings forth this creation made up of the three gunas. Hail to such personages, who bring renown to heroes themselves. Thus ends the 17th discourse, entitled The Taming of the Earth, forming part of the Conquest of Prithu in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 18. King Prithu milks the goddess Earth in the form of a cow. Maitreya continued. It was thus that the goddess Earth, this is, of course, translating, she soon gets the name Prithvi, named after Prithu, but also Bhumi Devi, or she has various other names, like Kshiti also. It was thus that the goddess Earth glorified Prithu, whose lips were quivering through anger. She was frightened, but she made herself quiet and steady with an effort of her will and spoke again. O Lord, you possess power to do anything that you please. Kindly control your wrath and consider what I tell you. Like the bee, a wise man takes the essence from everything. Sages who, like a bee from going from flower to flower, taking their pollen. Sages who have realized the truth have discovered and tested methods for the realization of human ends, here as well as hereafter. Any one of the later times who follows with faith and reverence those expedients found and taught by the ancient masters easily achieves the purposes of his life. He who in his foolishness disregards them and undertakes to accomplish purposes in his own ways can never be successful in his efforts. His ends are never realized, even though his efforts are renewed every now and then. O king, I noticed that the herbs and annual plants that had been evolved of old by Brahma, the creative agent of God, were being used and enjoyed by those who were unrighteous and had not undertaken any religious vows or observances. I therefore absorbed the herbs and annual plants, finding myself unprotected and uncared for by your predecessors, and that a generation of thievish people flourished on earth. This was, of course, during the immediately preceding and then during the reign of Vena that she's referring to. I meant to preserve them for sacrificial rites. It is natural that the plants have got assimilated in me through a long process of time. Now you are the person competent to draw them forth by some expedient known to be effective in this behalf. O hero of mighty arms, O Lord sustaining the life of beings, pray, find a calf, a befitting milk pot, and one who can draw the milk, so that, full of affection for the calf, I shall yield for you the desired objects in the form of milk if you want to have nutritious food coveted by living beings. O king of boundless power, remove my ruggedness and make me level, so that even when the rains have passed, the water poured down by the god of rain may stand on me. May all be well with you. Accepting this agreeable and wholesome advice of the goddess Earth, the emperor made a calf of Swayambhuva, so summoned his own ancestor Swayambhuva to take the form of the calf, and drew from her in his own hand, so he himself milked her by hand, all species of herbs and annual plants. Likewise, all other wise and intelligent persons too take the essence of everything, and so after Prithu, others also drew from earth, as a cow tamed by Prithu, the object sought after by them. The seers and sages, O most righteous one, made a calf of Brahaspati, the guru of the Devas, milked the goddess and got the sacred Veda for milk, their milk pots being the organs of hearing and of speech and the mind. So the ear and the speech and the mind are the vessel which contains the Veda, which is the sense of senses, the mind being the sense of senses. The Devas made a calf of Indra and drew from earth the drink known as Soma, and with it mental vigor, ardor of the senses, and physical strength for their milk, and a vessel of gold. The Daityas and Danavas made a calf of Prahlada, or Prahrada, the noblest of them all, and obtained wines and distillates, in other words, like alcohol and intoxicating spirits for their milk, in a bucket of iron. The Asuras, the Daityas and Danavas, have an interesting relationship with the metal iron. It's quite significant that iron is their vessel. In some cases, iron actually has power over them, particularly the Danavas. There's stories of iron weapons being particularly efficacious against them. Even iron bells, the ringing of iron bells, dispelling them. And iron is kind of a holy metal in their culture because it has power over them. So there's a specific significance to their vessel being iron. The Gandharvas and Apsaras made a calf of Vishvavasu and derived the sweetness of song and beauty for their milk in a cup made of a lotus flower. The venerable Pitris, the deities presiding over the rites in honor of the spirits of departed ancestors, made a calf of Aryama. Aryama is one of the Adityas and is also the chief of the Pitris. And they drew with reverence what is known as kavya, the food for the Pitris, which they held in a sun-dried earthen vessel and which was milk for them. The Siddhas made a calf of the sage Kapila, who is considered the greatest of all Siddhas, and obtained in the cup of the Welkin mysterious powers, the Siddhis themselves, powers which could be exercised by mere will. While the deities such as the Vidyadharas used the same sage for their calf, Kapila was also the calf for the Vidyadharas and some other types of spirits, and the same pot, the Welkin, and obtained as their milk the art of treading the air, the power of flight. Others, such as the Kimpurushas, an order of swift and quickly moving superhuman beings, who were adept in conjuring tricks, made a calf of Maya and obtained the magic art of those wonderful beings who can disappear, an art which could be exhibited by mere wish or thought. The Yakshas, the Rakshasas, the ghosts or bhutas, the detestably ugly fiendish creatures known as pishachas, all of the above of whom feed on raw flesh, made a calf of Rudra, their lord, Rudra, and drew the beer of blood in a skull for a pot. Even so, the serpents, with and without hood, the snakes and other poisonous creatures, made a calf of Takshaka, the Naga Raja, Naga deity Takshaka, and drew poison in their mouth. Drew poison in their, so their own mouth was the vessel, and they drew poison into it to give themselves the potency of poison. The graminivorous beasts, meaning like the grazers, grazing herd animals, made a calf of the bull of Lord Shiva. So Nandi was their calf, and they attained the grasses, for milk in the vessel of the forest meaning the wilderness. Their bounty is the grass, and the vessel is the wilderness. Again, the flesh-eating beasts with sharp teeth made use of the lion as the calf and got flesh for their milk in the pot of their body. The birds made a calf of Garuda, their ruler, and got mobile creatures such as moths and insects, as well as immobile creatures like fruits and berries for their milk, since moths and other insects and fruits and berries are mainly the food of birds. With the bunyan for the calf, the trees got different kinds of saps for their milk. The mountains used the Himalaya as the calf and obtained the various minerals in the basins of their ridges. Earth is a wish-yielding cow. Now that she had been made available for milking by King Prithu, all the species of living beings milked her, each with its own chief as the calf, and obtained milk in various forms, milk obviously being metaphorically for like that which was the sustaining essence to that type of being, and held it in their own vessel. In this way, O descendant of Kuru, King Prithu and others who sought food for themselves to eat milked the cow and got different kinds of milk in the form of their own food with different calves and cups. Thereafter, King Prithu became pleased with Goddess Earth, who now yielded all the objects of one's desire, and fondly accepted her as a daughter, feeling paternal love for her. Prithu, the son of Vena, the almighty King of Kings, crushed the crests of mountains with the ends of his bow and mostly leveled the surface of the terrestrial globe. Lord Prithu, the son of Vena, who was a father to his subjects and provided them with the means of subsistence, next planned, with due regard to propriety, dwellings at different places all over the earth, and he founded villages, towns, and cities, built castles and forts of every description, designed abodes for cowherds and pens for cattle, contrived camps and cantonments, and taught how to dig mines. He provided houses for farmers and cultivators and raised hamlets on hillsides. Before, Prithu had no idea of different kinds of human dwellings like villages and towns on this globe. Now they began to live comfortably with a sense of security of life and property in every part of the earth. So he was largely the introducer of civilization as we know it. Thus ends the 18th discourse, forming part of the story of Prithu's conquest in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 19. King Prithu performs 100 horse sacrifices. Maitreya continued. The king now consecrated himself as a preparation for 100 horse sacrifices in Brahmavrata, the land of Swayambhuva Manu, where flows the Saraswati in an easterly direction. The glorious Indra, the Lord of Paradise, grew jealous of the grand sacrificial festivities started by King Prithu, inasmuch as he saw that the same would obscure his own achievements, because at the time Indra was the only being who had ever performed 100 Ashvamedha yajnas, and he doesn't want someone else to match his feat, especially because that would mean that they would have the right to replace him as Indra. For in that sacrifice, Bhagavan Sri Hari, the Lord of all sacrifices and the almighty ruler, teacher, and soul of the whole universe, was directly perceived by all, so appeared in his full divine form, visible to the eye of everyone who was there. He was accompanied by Brahma and Shiva and the other protectors of the world, who came with their retinue and was being extolled by Gandharvas and hopes of Apsaras, as well as by sages. Along with the Lord came a number of Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Daityas, Danavas, Guhyakas, and so on, the foremost attendants of Srihari, led by Sunanda and Nanda, and devotees of the Lord like Kapila, Narada, and Dattatreya, as well as masters of yoga like Sanaka and his 3 brothers, who are all eager to wait upon him. And that sacrifice, O Vidura, the goddess Earth attended in the form of the celestial cow that supplies milk and clarified butter, ghee, serving as oblations for the sacred fire and gratifies all one's desire, yielded to the sacrificer all objects sought by him. Rivers bore all sorts of sweet and delicious drinks, such as those pressed from grapes and sugarcane, like grape juice and sugar water, as well as milk, curds, buttermilk, and clarified butter, together with many liquid foods. The gigantic trees which profusely dropped honey bore fruit in abundance. Oceans brought him heaps of jewels, and mountains brought 4 kinds of foods. Similarly, all the worlds with their guardians brought presents. The powerful Indra grew jealous of such prosperity of King Prithu, who looked upon Lord Vishnu as his lord and master, and threw obstacles in his way. While Prithu, the son of Vena, was engaged in worshipping Lord Vishnu, the lord of sacrifices, through the performance of the 100th horse sacrifice. So Indra didn't do anything for the first 99. He's only trying to interfere with the 100th. The jealous Indra stole away the sacrificial animal, himself remaining hidden from view. The venerable Atri detected him hurrying through the air in the garb of a heretic, which he had taken on himself as an armor, and which leads one to mistake unrighteousness for righteousness. Egged on by Atri to kill him, Prithu's son, who was a great car warrior, gave a chase, all inflamed with rage, and shouted, "Halt! Halt!" Indra wore elf locks on his head and was besmeared with ashes. Seeing him in that guise, elf locks basically meaning tangled, matted hair. So he was disguised as like a Shaiva-style sadhu. Seeing him in that guise, the prince took him to be piety incarnate, and since that's what those kind of sadhus are, great extreme devotees to spiritual life, and refrained from shooting an arrow at him. When he returned without having killed Indra, Atri urged him once more to slay the wrongdoers, saying, "Strike, dear child, the great Indra, who is in fact the vilest of gods, inasmuch as he has interfered with the yajna." Thus incited by Atri, Prithu's son again gave chase to Indra as he was hastening through the sky, even as Jatayu chased Ravana. That's a Ramayana reference. Indra, the lord of paradise, gave up for the prince the horse as well as the guise which he had assumed, and vanished. So he lets him have the horse back and escapes. The hero came back to his father's sacrifice, bringing the horse with him. Witnessing the wonderful achievement of Prithu's son, the great sages, Atri and others who were officiating at the yajna, gave him the name of Vijitashva, meaning the conqueror of the horse, O Vidura. Creating a thick mass of darkness, the mighty Indra stole once more under cover of that darkness the horse, tied with the gold chain from the sacrificial post and the wooden ring placed in front of it. So there's a sacrificial post, and in front of it is a wooden ring to loop a chain through to tie the horse. As Indra was hurriedly passing through the skies, Atri again directed the attention of Vijitashva. The hero, however, did not obstruct him, holding as he did a staff with a skull on its top. So again, he has this sadhu disguise that gives Vijitashva pause because he's not sure if he has the right person. Urged, however, by Atri, he set an arrow to his bowstring in indignation and aimed it at him. Indra again gave up the horse as well as his garb and turned invisible. The hero, too, thereupon returned to his father's sacrifice, taking the horse. It was weak-minded people who accepted as their own the reproachful garb assumed and shed by Indra. The hypocritical garbs and appearances that Indra assumed with the intention of stealing away the horse were the marks of a sinful propensity. The word khanda has been used here in the sense of a mark. In this way, the mind of men was attracted towards the deceitful garbs assumed and dropped by him when he stole away the horse with the motive of interrupting the sacrificial performance of Prithu, as well as towards false creeds passing as true religion under the attractive labels of Nagyas, Raktapatas, and so on, and preached with exceptional eloquence. When the venerable Prithu, who possessed extraordinary prowess, came to know this, he lifted his bow and took up an arrow in indignation to strike at Indra. Prithu's might and rapidity of movement were irresistible. He was terrible to look at. When the priests officiating at the sacrifice saw that he had made up his mind to kill Indra, they prevented him, saying, "O king of great wisdom, it is not worthy of you to kill anyone other than the beast approved of on this occasion. We will invoke to this very place through powerful spells Indra, who has thwarted your purpose, or has tried to thwart your purpose, and has been eclipsed by your glory, and will without delay forcibly throw your enemy, O king, into the fire." Having addressed Prithu in these words, O Vidura, his priests were indignantly proceeding to pour oblations into the sacred fire with the object of invoking Indra, with the sacrificial ladle in their hand, when Brahma appeared before them and prevented them, saying, Indra does not deserve to be killed by you, for yajna, since this is still during the first Manvantara, so Indra is by the name of Yajna, and Indra himself is actually an avatar of Vishnu in this Manvantara. Whom you seek to get rid of is a manifestation of the Lord himself, while the gods who are being propitiated are forms of Indra alone. Look at the great violation of dharma committed by Indra, or Brahmanas, with the intention of obstructing this performance of King Prithu. Therefore, let the number of sacrifices standing to the credit of Prithu of wide renown fall short of 100 by 1. So essentially, basically saying, let Indra have his way. Don't finish the 100th sacrifice. Turning to Prithu himself, Brahma said, you have no use for sacrifices well performed, since you are conversant with the dharma conducive to liberation. It is not worthy of you to show anger against the mighty Indra, who is your second self, since both Prithu and Yajna Indra are, both of them are partial avatars of Vishnu. For God bless you, both of you are manifestations of the Lord, enjoying excellent renown. Brood no more over this incident, O mighty monarch, and listen to our word with an attentive mind. For the mind of the man who contemplates achieving what has been thwarted by providence gets highly enraged and is steeped in blind infatuation. Let this sacrificial performance cease, for the gods are obstinate. It is due to this performance that dharma is being violated through pseudo-religious practices started by Indra. Look at these men being carried away by the attractive forms of false religion given currency of Indra, who has interfered with your sacrifice and stolen your horse. A ray of Lord Vishnu, you have now appeared on this earth from the body of Vena in order to preserve the religious faith of the people, conforming to the various scriptures that had been undermined by his misdeeds, O Prithu. Therefore, considering the welfare of this universe, O ruler of the people, fulfill the desire of the progenitors of the world, meaning the Prajapatis, and foil the conjuring trick employed by Indra in the shape of the terrible path of pseudo-religion, which gives rise to a number of false creeds. Maitreya went on. Thus advised and instructed by Brahma, the progenitor and preceptor of the world, Prithu, the ruler of the people, did as he was told, and not only came to terms with Indra, but also bestowed his affection on him. When Prithu, who had many a deed to his credit, had finished the ceremonial bath taken at the end of a sacrifice, whether or not the sacrifice was completed successfully, he still takes the ceremonial bath to kind of bring his involvement in it to a close. The gods that had been propitiated him during his sacrifices conferred boons. The Brahmanas, whose blessings came true and who had received their sacrificial fees and had been honored with reverence, pronounced their blessings on King Prithu, O Vidura, highly gratified, and added, all those who had assembled in response to your invitation, O mighty armed ruler, the Pitris, the Devas, the Rishis, human beings, have been honored by you with gifts and attention. Essentially, they're all assuring him that it's okay that you aborted the 100th yajna. This was still a huge success, even though we didn't completely finish the original program. Thus ends the 19th discourse, forming part of the story of Prithu's conquest and book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. We could stop there. It's just after 10. We're not going to finish the story of Prithu in one day. There's several more discourses.
So,
continuing with Prithu.
Yeah, Devala, there is a beautiful talk going on with Rajanatha Ram about yoga. So I really want to go watch that now because it connects that with all the Vedic literature and all that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I really like, love this story. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
I'm going to go listen to Rajanatha Ram.
Go for it.
Beautiful connection with the Vedic literature. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all.
Jai Gurudev.
Thank you, Radha.
Jai Gurudev.